Hello and welcome and good morning. It's really early, but it's late in America. And the bottom line, the situation, early days yet, but it's not looking that good for Biden. Not as good as expected. He has not lost. Trump has not won, but there are one or two disappointing trends that Biden will be facing. And my colleague Vasu will be joining us from Patna to Pennsylvania. Where are you, Vasu? Patna or Pennsylvania? I can't quite remember. You're all over the place.
Patna to Pennsylvania was supposed to be my line, which you borrowed, so I'll have to come up with something else. From Begusarai to Baltimore.
Arey wah, not bad. Okay, just let's have a quick roundout about the current situation. What states are being projected for who, and were they expected to be, who was expected to be leading there. First of all, look at South Carolina. Projected to be a Trump victory. The 2020 polls suggested it would be a Democrat victory, and Democrats won last time. So this is really huge. Actually, this is a Republican gain. Here we are, Illinois. Projected to be a Democrat win easily, and they are holding it. The Democrats won here last time. That's okay for Biden. Oklahoma. 7, a small state. Democrats projected to lose here. The Republicans won it last time, so it's just a hold, and it's expected. Let's move on. Indiana. Republicans won last time. They're holding it this time. Polls said Republicans would win it this time. Let's move on to the next. North Carolina, a pretty narrow state, swing state, a Democrat swing state. This will be a bit of a worry for Trump. Biden has it's a gain for the Democrats. The Republicans held it last time. Tennessee, a huge, comfortable win normally for the Republicans, and Trump is holding that. That's as expected. West Virginia, again a huge victory projected for, it's a safe seat for the Republicans, and Trump is holding on to that. Nothing unexpected there. Now we're moving on to New Jersey. This is a solid Democrat state. Look at that. It was projected to win by 20%, and the Democrats are holding on. Pennsylvania, this is a swing state. Now this would have been very important for Trump to get hold of. So the Democrats are gaining this because Trump won it last time, but the polls projected. And let's move on to Ohio. Republicans won it last time. Polls projecting Republicans to win it narrowly this time, and the Democrats are gaining this. That's a big. So things are changing as the day goes on. Here's a Republican gain. My gosh, this is Illinois. Illinois, it was projected to be won by the Democrats. They won it last time. At the moment, Trump is being projected to win. Things can change over time. So this is a switch from, this is a huge surprise. But we'll come back to that. Texas. This is a really important state. 38 electoral college votes. Huge. The Republicans won it last time. They were projected to win it narrowly this time, and it's currently being projected as a Democrat gain. That is the biggest news of the morning so far. Texas. 38 seats switching sides towards the Democrats. DC always totally Democrat, and it's happening again this time by as big a margin as last time, almost. So Democrats are holding on. It's only 3. It's not a state. It's the 50 states. Just let's go back to the first one we showed. Just see you've got an update on that. If we can get back to that. Here we are. Indiana. Republicans won it last time. Republicans are projected to win it this time, and they've held on to it. And all this will change as we go along. Okay, once more, Massachusetts. Democrats always have won this state. It's a solid, traditionally Democrat state, and they're holding it, projected to be holding it right now. So, a really important start. We need to look at Florida at some point, because there's a big change happening there. Yeah, we've seen So let me go to Dorab and Baj. But first, Vasu. Some surprise here. Wait, Florida. That's really, really important. Here, the Democrats, the polls say Democrats were going to win this by a narrow margin, and it's a big state, 29 electoral college votes. The Republicans won it narrowly last time, but now it looks as though the polls are wrong here, and that I think even Nate Silver has accepted that. It's looking wrong. I mean, there's still a few more votes to be counted, but this is a big one. Right, Dorab? This,
Absolutely.
what kind of overall picture are you getting right now, Dorab?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I think it's almost as expected. The one thing I'd like to correct, you said South Carolina was a Democratic state. It wasn't. It was Republican. North Carolina was Republican.
Right.
South Carolina,
right. Yes,
Lindsey
yes.
Graham is standing for the Senate. He'll also win probably.
Right.
I think Florida,
Correct,
we need
correct.
to wait a little, because last time 3% of the votes went to other candidates, the Libertarian Party and the Greens. This time they're down to 1%.
You're talking about, were you talking about South
just 1
Carolina?
second, please. Sorry?
Yeah.
Since 2016.
Carry on.
Since 2016, the number of non-college educated people in Florida has gone down by 500,000. The number of college educated people has gone up by more than 1 million. So, there is that slight move in the direction of Biden. We still have to wait, of course, but it's always close.
This is important. Just 1 second. North Carolina, polls projected a gain for the Democrats, and it looks like it is going to be a gain from last time. North Carolina.
Again, there is a Senate seat there.
That's really important as well.
There's a Senate seat there, a very important Senate seat. That might also go.
Okay. But let's just stick at the presidential at the moment. Baj, what are you getting so far as a general picture?
Well, obviously, like you said, there's no landslide likely. And I tweeted 2 minutes ago, but the New York Times is calling Florida for the Republicans, and they're running an exit poll which shows that Cuban and Hispanic neighborhoods, there has been a 13 and 11% swing to the Republicans. And while Democrats have gained, and while Democrats have gained amongst older whites, that is not enough for them to win. So they're actually saying it's a 95% chance that Trump will win. They are also saying that
I think, sorry,
Georgia,
Baj, there's you were always pointing out to a particular county to look out for, Miami-Dade, which Hillary won by a huge margin, and this time Democrats have won, Biden has won, but by a much smaller margin, and that is meant to be a turning point, that Miami-Dade, and you did point out, keep focusing on that county. Big change. I think the Cubans have caused the swing.
Miami-Dade has, so far it looks like their majority has dropped by about 10% here. So that's huge. I think on Miami-Dade, we can say that journalists were better than pollsters, because everybody was writing about the fact that blacks weren't turning out, Hispanics were turning out for Republicans, and there was a huge Republican drive in the last few years.
Vasu, Baj says journalists better than pollsters.
Always. Prannoy, where's this ever in doubt?
So who's...
Let's actually go across to Amitoj Singh. Amitoj Singh is with us from New York City, I believe. I mean, I don't know if we're getting anything from New York itself. I don't think there are any big surprises. But Amitoj, what are you hearing and seeing so far?
Well, you guys are on top.
And also, where is Trump
news,
and where is Biden? Do we know?
That is surprising, to say the least, if I can say that. But let me just break it down. Here's what I think Baj needs to stress a little bit more on. When you talked about Miami-Dade and Florida, Florida is representative of America. It's basically the microcosm of America. Florida is giving you a signal, and Georgia has given you a signal. Georgia had become a battleground state, which was anyway a surprise because it's a Republican state historically. But at this time, what you're seeing is that both are leaning towards the Republicans, and Donald Trump is doing better. And the big one, I want to stress on Miami-Dade, and I want to stress on Hillsborough County, which is another county. There are 67 counties that I've studied, all of them out there in Florida. I can tell you that these are the most populous counties. So they actually count for the most amount of votes. Now, in Miami-Dade, what happened last time in 2016 was that Hillary Clinton won the most number of votes that Democratic candidate has actually won, 63%, 1% more than even Barack Obama managed in Florida. And this time what's happening is that in the early votes, and this is a bad sign because the early votes are usually Democratic, they are not even at 55%. So what you're looking at is that Florida is in the game and is there for Trump. If that's the case, then it's definitely what Baj said, that it's not going to be a result tonight. We're going to have to wait. The good news for the Democratic Party is Pennsylvania, where you're looking at a percentage that one was not expecting. But again, the rider to that is that you're looking at early votes. There are people who voted early by that is in person or by mail. So I think, Vasu, we just have to wait. We have to be patient. This is a situation where there's going to be a lot of PTSD that is going to be coming back. That's okay. Live with it. Survive. We're going to get the result, but it's going to take a while. And I think it's still going to come down to Pennsylvania. Just one last thing I want to say. In 2000 and after that, they've always said one thing. They've said the way to win the American election is Florida, Florida, Florida. This time, Karl Rove, who everyone knows is the best Republican strategist there is, he has said that the way to win the American election is Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania will not give us a decisive result, probably, one that someone called Donald Trump will actually accept all the way till Friday.
Right.
Okay.
Let's just do one thing, Vasu. Let's just go through it all again, because every minute...
Yes.
Every minute that we're on air, the more votes are being counted and the leads are changing. So let's just go through what the latest situation is in each state, because that gives us a picture. First of all, let's look at Ohio. Ohio projected by the polls to be Republican narrowly, but it is more or less in the Democrat, because it was very, very narrow, and the Democrats have gained that since last time, and that's 18 electoral college votes. That's pretty big. That's a big swing. 18 less for the Republicans since last time and 18 more for the Democrats. That's a 36 electoral college votes swing. Let's move on to another one. Pennsylvania. Amitoj was just talking about that. The Republicans won it last time. The polls projected that Democrats would win it this time, and the Democrats are leading there. It's a gain for the Democrats, 20 electoral college votes. So that's another 40 seats swing. 20 less for Republicans, 20 more for Democrats. Oklahoma, it's a foregone conclusion. We can move on. It's always won by huge margins, and it's holding on to that, Republicans. North Carolina, this was, again, it's a fairly big state, 15 electoral college votes, held and won by the Republicans in 2016. Polls, though, suggested this was going to flip, and it has flipped. It was suggested just flip very narrowly, so we don't know how many votes have been counted and how many more to come. But at the moment, that's another 15 electoral college votes flipping
I would just
from
want
one
to point
side
out
to
that
another.
North Carolina has had 95% of its votes that have been counted so far are actually early votes. That means mail-in votes and people who voted early by walking in a few days early. 95% of the votes that have been counted. So North Carolina,
that's
we should
an
wait
important
on.
point. Yeah. But whenever we have a tick and project it, that's what at least two American major sources are projecting. They're projecting a victory there based on all these factors. But you're right. The early votes will tend to be more Democrat, and today's voting in person will be more Republican. That's what people say. Ohio, we've done. This is a huge gain because the Republicans won it by 8% last time and were projected by the polls to win. Now, this is the biggest gain from the polls for the Democrats and for the Republicans, and Trump will be really pleased with this. The Republicans held on to this by 1%. Hillary Clinton was most disappointed with what happened in Florida. The polls said they was going to switch this time to Democrat, but it didn't switch. The polls were wrong here. Let's move on to next. Arkansas. Absolutely traditional Republican. No need to even bother about that. It's as per projection and as per expectation. Oklahoma, again similar, traditionally Republican, and Republican are holding on to that. But that's very easy. Huge margins of victory. Now New Jersey, again exactly the opposite, totally expected. Democrats were projected to win this by 20%. They won it by 14% last time, and they're holding on to it. So it's a safe Democrat seat, and they are holding it. Again, DC, it's 91%. That's just like, you could predict that with your eyes shut. Texas. Now let's hold on here for a second. Texas is a hugely important state. 52 to 43% to the Republican, a 9% margin of victory last time. Polls had suggested the Republicans would still hold on, but by narrowly. So it was projected to be a swing state, and the Democrats have gained that. Now that is huge in terms of a switch. 38. Baj, this is and Dorab, this is huge, right? 38 seats switching. That's a 76% 76 electoral college vote swing.
It's the second largest state after California, and currently they are leading by, the Democrats are leading by 3% in Texas. I mean, it's not gone Republican since Democrats since 1980. 40 years it's been a Republican state. So if it goes, I mean, you then don't need Florida. It's much bigger than California. It's after California, the second largest state. They've registered 1.9 million voters between 2016 and 2020, more than any other state.
Right.
New voters. And the majority of them are young. And also there's migration into
Texas,
let's go across like California.
Yeah. Right. Very, very important. Let's go across to Cindy Sain. She's the Voice of America reporter talking to us. Cindy Sain, Florida will be a huge disappointment for the Democrats and a huge encouragement for the Republicans. But what about Texas? What's your take of the current trends? I know things are going to change, but currently, what is the situation according to you?
Right. Well, I've been following along, and you're right on your trends so far. And I would say right now it's still early, but there are a couple of warning signs for President Trump, which, as you have pointed out, currently, as I speak to you at this moment, it looks like former Vice President Biden is at least very competitive in Ohio and in North Carolina, which is my home state.
Yes.
And these are states that Republicans were expected to win, that President Trump was expected to win. So that looks very good if you're Joe Biden, not so a little nerve-wracking for President Trump. But as you say, Florida, and particularly the Miami-Dade County area, is a disappointment for Joe Biden because apparently Latino voters or the turnout there was not as good. VOA is not calling Florida yet by any means, but so far it's looking President Trump is leading there.
Terrific. Right. So just your view on Texas. How kind of certain are we that which way is that going to go? Is there could that still change? Because
yes,
it's
it
so
could.
significant.
It definitely could. And as you pointed out, it is a huge prize, 38 electoral votes, but I would say it's so far it's too early to know. With all, as you well know, we've got the complications with the early vote, and there was tremendous turnout in Harris County, and there were even legal battles over curbside voting, whether that could be counted or not, and that prevailed that could be counted, which is what Democrats wanted. So I think we may have to be a little bit how Texas turns out.
Right. Vasu,
On Texas,
you've got a question.
Yeah, Cindy, I just wanted to ask you, whether you had any idea where the two main presidential candidates are going to be tonight, because in 2016, both of them were holding these victory rallies in New York, Trump and Hillary. I guess with the pandemic, that's out of the question now.
Right. Yeah, it is a bit different this year. President Trump is at the White House, and I think there is some kind of gathering or event at the White House. Reports said that he originally was planning to have it at the Trump Hotel in Washington, but then changed plans 3 or 4 days ago. Vice President Biden is watching the returns at home in Delaware, and he said that if he had something to say, he would come out and say it, but if not, he would just wait patiently until all the votes are counted. So right now, everybody just watching, not seeing either of them yet, and still early in the evening here, so waiting to have some more of these states counted out.
Okay, Prannoy.
Bring up Illinois, Vasu. Just have a look at Illinois, if we can bring that. And we can bring in Sadanand Dhume. Thank you very much, Sadanand, for joining us. Before we get Illinois
Good to be here, Prannoy.
Latest position up, Sadanand, your take on the current situation. Who would be more tense right now, Donald Trump or Biden?
Biden for sure. I think it's definitely still early days and with the usual caveats. But if you look at the 3 swing states that they're leaning towards Trump, if you look at Florida, North Carolina, and Georgia, it looks like all 3 are going for Trump. Even though at this point Biden is not trailing in all of the 3, but if you go by the forecast based on where they've already counted and where the counting still has to be done, so if Trump is 3 for 3. And the New York Times right now is reporting that there's a 66% chance that Trump is 3 for 3 in those states. Then it means that he is starting this evening with a very solid lead. And I cannot overemphasize the importance of Florida, because if Biden had managed to win Florida, it would have been very, very difficult for Trump. And then we would have seen perhaps the makings of a blue wave. But if Trump holds Florida, holds North Carolina, which people were also talking of as a swing state, then I think it becomes much more competitive. And one more very quick point, I don't think, I think it's way premature to be talking about Texas, simply because the votes that we're looking at are basically coming in right now, if I'm not mistaken, from the Houston area. So, and then there's also the question of early ballot counting. So basically, the last polls did show Trump ahead. I don't think we should read too much into early voting in Texas. Florida, it's not early voting. They've counted more than 90% of the vote. And so the places to look at more closely at this stage of the evening over here, morning over there for you, would perhaps be places like Florida and Ohio, where we actually have a good chunk of the vote in to look at.
Soni?
Vasu, you had a question. Oh, Vasu's. Dorab, you heard what Sadanand Dhume said. He said that at this moment Biden would be more tense. Do you agree with that?
I think so. I think, if the chances of Florida are slipping out of his hands, and that is,
yeah,
that is very concerning, because then he just stops Trump in his tracks there. When Florida goes, then he has to work that much harder to get there. And, he has to turn North Carolina. Frankly, Texas, I think now would solve most of his problem. But Ohio is leading. We lost last time. Biden is leading in Ohio, which also is a big state, not as big as Florida, but still a relatively large state. So I think, but he must be more tense, because nothing seems to be going particularly his way. It's as last time. He's got to change as last time. And the northern states, Pennsylvania has come, but the limited numbers have come in. So Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, those states, then he has to win if he has to stay in the race. But I think Texas, the state to watch, more than 60% has been counted. So we got to just wait and watch that. But the blue wall is what he's got to build again. If he builds that, he wins. Otherwise, he loses. He's got to build I think Florida is nearly gone.
Anything to add to that? Because things are changing as we speak, but certain underlying patterns are emerging.
Yeah, I think Texas, which we seem to be thinking could be in play. Actually, the counties that are reporting are the ones that Democrats do well in. The urban ones, exactly. Austin, Houston, Dallas. All the smaller counties in the north, east, on the west, etc., haven't come in. These are all Republican ones. And if you look at Austin, 90% of the votes have already been counted. And it's giving the Democrats a good lead. But there's not going to be a big increase in the Democrat lead in Texas from these strongholds. So it's now going to be defending that lead. And I'm not sure, with 60-65% of the votes counted so far, all of these are early votes, whether Texas is something that you could say is going to go Democrat right now. I think it's not that clear. I think if what the New York Times is saying on Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, then we are really in for what Dorab said, a fight about the three states that went Republican last time: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
I think this one, that Georgia is a huge, just like Florida, because the polls projected Democrats were going to win there, and they are not winning. The Republicans are holding on to that. Let's bring in Clovis Casali, a journalist. And Clovis, we know that journalists are better than psephologists and pollsters. What's your current reading of the situation with Florida and Georgia going to Trump, but Texas looking more like it's going to Biden? It's not what the polls were expecting at this moment, right?
The race is extremely tight here. What I can tell you, it's neck and neck, but it does seem that Trump has a very slight advantage, according to the governor of Florida. Well, Donald Trump, the incumbent president, has won Florida, but it seems that these results are not exactly definite, so one needs to remain cautious. I'm currently here in Miami, in South Beach, and I met today in South Beach with Democratic voters who are extremely worried about the outcome of the election. They thought that Donald Trump would contest whatever result would be if it was favorable to him. Then I met in Little Havana, in the area where you have a very strong Cuban American community, voters who are die-hard Republicans and who were fiercely behind Donald Trump. These Cuban Americans and Hispanics I met in Miami all told Donald Trump is simply the best man for the job, one man who is taking America in the right direction. That's, of course, not the point of view of all the people here in Florida, but Donald Trump and Joe Biden neck and neck, it does seem, with possibly a slight advantage for Donald Trump. Florida, very important. 29 electoral votes, crucial for the US president in his bid for re-election, if he is to reach that magic number of 270 electoral votes. Donald Trump needs Florida. It's probably not the same for Joe Biden, who's got different paths to victory, possibly.
Right. Clovis, just a question, though, about what could have led to this Republican edge in Florida, because in the early polls or the mail-in ballots, it looked like the Democrats had built up a big cushion in Florida. They claim to have improved their ground game much more than in 2016. But what do you think are the reasons that it actually seems to be leaning towards Trump?
Well, first it has to be said that the Sunshine State was won by Donald Trump 4 years ago against Hillary Clinton. It was a very slight margin, and it always is the case in Florida, it has to be said. Another important point, Florida usually picks the person who will then become the U.S. president. When you look at the history of U.S. presidential elections, it always is the case. So that's why Florida is such an important battleground state. Also worth pointing out that there's been a lot of early voting. We're talking maybe 60% of registered voters in Florida who got to cast their ballots before Election Day. And that means that we could get the results very quickly tonight, because the rules in Florida are such that the early voting could be counted before Election Day, meaning that made the work of officials easier. Anyway, if it is confirmed that Donald Trump has won Florida, it's good news for him, but it doesn't mean that the battle is lost for Joe Biden and the Democrats.
Okay. Prannoy, just thanks very much, Clovis. Prannoy, just very quickly, before we move on, we've got tweets now from the two main candidates, and in a way the tweets sum up the characteristic of both these candidates. Trump, as always, in all caps, all capitals, we are looking really good all over the country, thank you. And Joe Biden, this is our moment to prove that love is more powerful than hate, hope is more powerful than fear, excuse me, light is more powerful than dark. Prannoy.
You know, Vasu, yeah, it's like, I mean, they can keep hoping and they keep claiming, but there's still a long way to go. But we can just bring up Virginia. That is a real amazing turnaround in favor of Trump. Just look at Virginia. That's South Carolina. South Carolina, that's as expected, no problem. Virginia, if we can just get a hold of. Virginia is actually projected as a safe Democratic state. Here it is. Look, the Democrats won by 6% last time. They were projected to win by 8% this time. And now the Republicans are being projected to gain and take over Virginia with its 13. And, you know, they're talking about the projection, polls projected that the Democrats would have a margin of victory here of 12%. So if any poll has got, if polls have ever got anything wrong, they've got Virginia totally wrong, if that trend continues. Remember, these are still early days in counting.
Virginia is reporting only 15% of count so far. And the largest county, Fairfax County, is reporting very low vote count. Virginia is right outside DC.
Prannoy, maybe
Government workers. So that is what it made it traditionally democratic. Now one doesn't know whether what surprises me is why should the rural areas come in late? There's so few votes to count. I mean, it's not counting by hand. So what surprised me is that where you have, say, 50,000 people in a constituency versus 500,000, why shouldn't the rural areas not come in first? They are the areas of strength for Trump. And many states, they're not coming in early enough. They're coming in later.
No, but Dorab, I've just heard that most of the rural states are coming slow because most of the counting apparently in rural states is being done by Parsis. I don't know, they go out there, they thought the Parsis would be, honest and accurate, but they didn't realize how slow they were. Quickly take a short break before Dorab replies. See you in a moment from now.
Welcome back. The world is watching as the election results in America unfold, and it's turning out to be every bit of a nail-biter as many had expected. Joining our panel, Prannoy, is Kishore Mehbubani, who's Distinguished Fellow, Asia Research Institute, and author, is joining us. Thanks very much, Kishore, for being on the show. Now, I know, Kishore, we're still waiting for the results to crystallize, but it's not looking as bad for Trump as perhaps the pollsters had expected. It's a very broad question, Kishore, but if we are going to have Trump 2.0, what do you think it's going to mean to the world order?
You're absolutely right. My Democratic friends are getting nervous. They were expecting some good wins early on, but it looks as though they're going to lose Florida to Trump. And I think we should be psychologically ready for Trump 2.0. But I can tell you that for most countries in the world, Trump 2.0 would mean 4 more years of unpredictability. And I think, frankly, for most countries, 4 more years of predictability is better than 4 more years of unpredictability. So that will be the psychological effect. And as a very senior European figure told me in private, Kishore, if Trump is re-elected, it's the death of the West. So there'll be profound changes that flow from Trump 2.0.
Okay. Prannoy.
I think I totally agree that this is not exactly an ideal start for the Democrats today. Texas, let me make it very clear, would be a huge thing for the Democrats. Just let's have a look at Texas. But I want to make it very clear that while a couple of US channels and media houses are forecasting a Democrat victory in Texas, it's currently the lead is very narrow. It was less than 1% a short while ago. It's now at about 1.5%, and there's still 40% of Texas to be counted. So while this could be a huge, when we say Democratic gain, that's just a projection. And remember, 40% of this is still to be, of the state, the votes are still to be counted. So the only bit of good news for the Democrats, maybe again, it's too early to call. Joining us now is the one and only Maya Mirchandani. Maya, are you online and ready? Have you woken up?
Been awake for quite some time and
So what's your take so far?
Well, I've been too hesitant to make predictions on this election. So I've said quite some time it will be too close to call. I sort of tend to see from the numbers coming in that kind of, that's to be the case, really. I do think that we're seeing in certain states, like Texas, for example, signs of a flip. And I think that's got to do with a lot of things. One is that there's an immigrant population that's actually coming out in large numbers to vote in Texas. The other thing is that you see a large amount of retired people from California, from the tech community west, moving there because Texas has lower tax rates than California, and that triggered a wave of people moving to Texas who come from Democrat states, and the demographic has somehow right about Texas turning purple. I think we might actually see it turn blue in this election. Although, you know me, I've known me for a long time. I never call elections. I just wait till come in, Prannoy.
Yeah, absolutely right, Maya. Cautious as ever, and quite rightly so. We'll take a short break while we catch up with which states are speeding up their counting and whether states are changing hands as the counting continues. Back in just a moment. See you then. Right, welcome back. Let's do a quick update on what's been happening so far. Things are changing already. It's very, very uncertain because counting is carrying on, and because of ballot voting this time, the counting can be quite skewed, and also they come from different areas in a state. But let's just anyway have a look at what's happening in each of these states. Look at Michigan. Michigan is amazing. Although the Republicans won it last time, the Democrats, the polls suggested the Democrats were going to win this easily with an 8% margin, and the Republicans are leading right there. Michigan 16, very, very important. That is a turn up for the books as far as the polls are concerned. Pennsylvania, a big gain so far. Again, this may change for the Democrats. The Republicans had won it last time, but the polls were saying the Democrats would win this by 4%, and at the moment they are leading there. Let's move on to Florida. This is the big story of the morning. Almost everything has been counted, and while the polls said the Democrats were going to win here, the Republicans, like last time when Trump beat Hillary Clinton here, and that was a big change in the whole election, Trump is holding on to Florida. Completely opposite to what the polls said. What about North Carolina? Here, this is a good gain for the Democrats. They'll be pleased with this as well. Although the polls did actually forecast this, so it won't come as a surprise, but it will be a pleasant change compared to what they've been seeing in Florida. Now let's move on to South Carolina. Standard traditional Republican, and yes, they've held on to it, and they were projected to hold on by a margin of 7%, 52 to 45. Moving on, New Jersey, solid Democrat. You can move on. This is just standard and expected. Winning by 20% was the projection. Texas, now this is really interesting. There's still a long way to go. The margin of lead that Biden has in Texas is just about 1.5%, and there's still 40% of the state to be counted. So when it's ticked and again and projected, it's really that can definitely change. This is expected. Illinois, traditionally Democrat, they were expected to win this by 16%. They're holding on to this, and they won it last time as well. Delaware, again, exactly the same, traditionally Democrat, and they're holding on to it. It's amazing how the states in America, many of them are not at all swing. They don't change from one election to the other, and Delaware is just one of those. Alabama, again, solidly, always historically Republican and projected to hold still. Massachusetts, Democrat, again, solidly always has been projected to hold. No surprise. So we should focus a bit on the surprises. This is not a surprise. Again, solidly, traditionally Republican, and they are projected to hold on to this. I think if we look at, actually there are one or two which are surprised. If we try and get up Virginia, not West Virginia, but Virginia, that is amazing. If we can have a look at that. And Ohio and Texas, these are, so we're just getting hold of Virginia. Just have a look at that. Virginia was won by the Democrats last time, projected to be won by the Democrats this time by 8%, and the Republicans are ahead here. Okay, it's 13, but it's projected, again, this can change. Baj wants to have a comment, and maybe he's got an update on this.
Yeah, I think Dorab said this a few minutes ago. Fairfax County, which is the one that borders Washington, is the big Democratic county in this state. And out there, only 20% of the votes have come in. So I would say that, you know, it's far too early to even think of Virginia being a battleground state at the moment. You know, I think we have to wait much longer. You also mentioned Michigan in one of the graphics showing that the Republicans were ahead. Again, the count here is very low. And if you look at a place like Detroit, it's showing that it's pink just now. So it's showing a lead for the Republicans. But Detroit will not be pink. I mean, it has a huge black population. There's no question of Detroit being. So it's very early on these two states, I feel.
Absolutely true. But what's interesting about Virginia, one second, just what's interesting about Virginia, yes, there's still a long way to go. I think more than 50% of the votes to be counted, but the lead at the moment for the Republicans is 18%, which is like, you know, that can also change. But, okay, let's take a quick break. By the time we come back, it may have changed. We'll see you again in a moment. 18% lead. Let's see if it changes. It could, because there's still a long way to go in Virginia. Baj is quite right. Welcome back. Just to keep reiterating the key point in the early hours of our early hours and the early hours of counting in America on Tuesday night. Florida, the very, very important state that actually almost considered to be what changed Hillary's fortunes. 93% has been counted and Trump is leading there. And the Democrats said, look, 2020 polls, the Democrats were said to be going to win this according to the polls, 49 to 47. But the Republicans, this is a big trend in the morning that will please Donald Trump a lot. Right, Dorab?
Yes, it will. I mean, he can't win without Florida. Now I think that if the Democrats have to have any hope, there's Ohio actually where they're leading, which is about, I think, 17 electoral votes. This is an area they could concentrate on. Texas is getting tighter and tighter by the minute. So I think, again, going to come down in the end to the northern blue wall. And I think that's what's going to decide. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, they are the states that will decide what finally happens. But I think Trump is doing very well vis-a-vis the polls. The polls
right
are
now, Texas
once again underestimating it.
Dorab? Yeah, Texas got over 60% of votes counted. Last time we looked at it, was 40%. And Democrats are still holding on to it. But is it, how big is the margin there? Is it very narrow?
Very small. But you know, Colorado, which is another state, you know, you start got to looking at all the small states to make up for Florida. For instance, Colorado, Biden is leading by a lot. You know, he's got to pick up small states to make up for the loss of the big state like
Just
Florida.
Let's focus on Texas for a minute.
Fine.
Just let's focus on Texas. Amitoj, you've got an update on the current situation.
Here's what's happened. In the last 10 minutes, what's happened in Texas is that Donald Trump actually took a lead of 1,200 votes, and then 5 minutes later, Biden retook that lead and he has a lead of about 5,000 votes right now. 60% of the votes are in. What one needs to remember, and I was in Houston in October when Howdy Modi happened. Houston is the epicenter. San Antonio is there, and all these major cities out there in Texas are the ones that you're seeing the votes come in from. And we are seeing very clearly that the suburbs of Texas, that's where you're going to get a red wave. Those are the votes that are going to come. They're still to come. That is where you're going to see Donald Trump retaking that lead. And I just want to make two quick points. The polls have got it wrong, or if I can be more gentle on them, I can say one thing, that they're within the margin of error. So they haven't really got it wrong. That's what they usually say, right? So with Florida happening, and I'm giving you another update, a latest update that we're getting. I'm looking at a particular county in Florida, Osceola. Osceola is a county which is an important county where Biden is leading just by about 30,000 votes right now. But there's been a particular situation there. I can't get into what it is, but I do know it's got to do with an outage, an electricity outage. Now, that could potentially mean that we'll have a slightly delayed result in that very key constituency. That's another update. And there's one more thing.
Regain the lead. Trump has regained the lead in Florida.
Yes.
But again, it's just 0.5%. But and there's 64% of Florida has been counted. So you're right, just going back and forth. Vasu.
But Florida is a big one. It's already a big
Texas.
lead.
Yeah. Prannoy, just a quick update on Texas. According to the New York Times, they've already counted 73% of the vote. And it's 49.4% to Trump and 49.3% to Biden. That's how close it is. This is New York Times.
My God. Right. That is very, very close.
The new Florida. It's going to be the new Florida, where they go to court to make the count in the end.
One thing on Ohio, Prannoy, Nate Silver is saying that Biden's lead has now shrunk to 3.5% as in-person voting is being counted. Earlier, it was ballots that had been mailed-in ballots and early voting. So he's not saying that Ohio is going to go Democrat.
Ohio is going to go Democrat. That is a big,
it's
big gain for the Democrats. Too close. You're not yet saying, okay, fine. Yeah, there's it was just
also, Prannoy,
a
just
very,
a quick,
very narrow lead and a long
update
way
on
to
Michigan.
go. Yeah.
Prannoy, just an update on Michigan. You were talking earlier about Virginia, which is a blue state which might be heading red, and the huge 20 percentage point gap between Trump and Biden, even though it's early polling. Look at Michigan again. Only 19% of votes counted though, but again a 20 percentage point between Trump and Biden according to the New York Times. Trump is at 60% approximately and Biden is only at 40%.
Yeah, but Detroit hasn't come in.
That is
Detroit
amazing because the polls were saying that Democrats would win this by 8% margin, and you're saying there's a 20% lead for the Republicans at the moment. But how much you said was counted?
Yeah. Only 19%.
No, Detroit hasn't come in. Detroit hasn't come in.
3% of Detroit has come in as yet. So I think we should be very careful on this one.
Yeah. Actually, we should be careful on every single one. Yeah.
In Georgia,
Except
I just
Florida.
wanted to add one more update. Georgia has been what Ohio has been for the Democrats. Everyone thought that Georgia would be a lot closer in fact, the Democrats. They were calling in for the Democrats by just about 2 points, and they were calling Ohio as a complete tie. You've seen the surprise in Ohio, but there's still a long way to go in Ohio. We're looking at a 330,000 vote lead in Ohio for the Democrats, but 55% of the votes have been counted, so there's a long way to go. But in Georgia, one of the main counties has still not been counted, and that's a Democratic county, which is why the Democrats are saying right now, hold your horses, it's going to be a little closer in Georgia. For the moment, it has been a surprise that the Republicans have such a big lead in Georgia. And Ohio is 18 votes, electoral votes. You're looking at Georgia's votes also, which are very critical. I think this is going down to the wire. We're going to be here a long, long time.
Prannoy, no Republican has won the
close.
presidency without Ohio in God knows how many years. They have to win Ohio to get the presidency.
And how many people have become president without Florida and Ohio? Very, very few since the Second World War.
But you know, just
so Ohio, 60% has been counted, and the polls are wrong there as well. Massachusetts, it's a standard stuff. You know, it's nothing unexpected. Here's Ohio. Let's just focus on that a bit again. Projected by the polls for a narrow victory. It's a swing state, and at the moment, with 60% of the votes counted, Democrats are leading. Do we know how much they're leading by? Baj?
Sorry?
About 300,000.
Yeah.
I can.
He's leading by 300,000.
No, percent.
Percent is, sorry,
okay.
Biden is
we'll come back to
about
that.
74,000 votes. Up.
No. In
so
Ohio,
3% lead for
1.90%.
3% lead for the Democrats, and 60% counted. So it's still very vulnerable, yes. But it is a very important state. So Maya, at the moment, it really is anybody's game, right? It's just the changes are happening. Of course, the polls seem to be wrong in a number of cases. But again, as Baj and Dorab keep pointing out, a lot of counting still to be done in different areas, and that changes the entire complexion. These are not randomized samples. These are actual votes, but from different areas. Yeah.
That's right. So, I mean, I have two comments. For example, Ohio, which you've been saying, Ohio, Kentucky, all these part of the sort of rust belt of America, Appalachian values. I urge everyone on this panel
to read a book called The Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, the Republican who grew up in that part of the United States, talking about how there was this core population of Democratic voters who actually swung Republican because of the fact that they perceived themselves as having been left out of Social Security, of healthcare, of education, and things like that, and therefore the core base that Trump kind of garnered in the last election. They were very, very clear supporters of Bernie Sanders in 2016. And that was because of the confidence that those voters would likely to swing Bernie Sanders' way. Hillary's campaign was actually criticized for having ignored, states like Ohio and Kentucky. And I think we're seeing the fact
I'll just
that
interrupt
Biden
you
has
for a
made some
second there.
Yeah, sure.
I just interrupted Maya for a second. Before the voting was counting had started, the bookies were saying 60% chance Biden would win and only a 40% chance Trump would win. At this moment, the bookies' odds are saying 65% chance Trump will win. Trump will be the next president, and only 35% chance Biden. A complete flip. Dorab, the bookies know more than you?
Always.
Impossible.
Because they put their money where their mouth is.
They put their money where their mouth is. My God, that is a
Dorab,
huge change. 60-40 to 40-65, 35-65. Yeah. Go ahead, Vasu.
No, just a question to all of you, but I mean, if Dorab wants to take it or anybody, about the pollsters possibly getting it wrong, because there's been a lot of talk about how the pollsters tried to correct their methodology after 2016. They were going after demographics which they hadn't fully tapped in 2016. They were going after shy Trump voters. In fact, Nate Silver famously said that there's no concept of shy Trump voters anymore. They're not shy about going public with their affiliations. Despite that, we do seem to be seeing a repeat of that. How do you explain that, Dorab?
Don't have any idea at all, frankly. But on the shy voter, Baj and I have different points of view. My point is that if the national polls are correct, and nobody's disputed those last time, the national polls were right. The state-wise, they went wrong. So the question of the shy voter, he must exist in the national poll too. Why doesn't he exist there? Now let's take why the states are going. I think there's samples of 600 and 700 per state. It is true that many people put several samples together, but still a sample of 600 in a state as large as Florida. Now you could do 600 in New York because you don't have to poll. You just got to poll 10 guys walking on Central Park. But in Florida, I mean, you just need much, much larger samples. We are used to larger samples, they are not. So I think it's a sampling problem. I just don't know what, I can't frankly think of anything else other than a sampling problem. And the enormous variety within a state. Say Florida in the north is more like Georgia. In the south is more like all the guys who come down from the north to retire there. So the whole state, a state is broken into different parts. I'm sure they try and fix it, but obviously it's not being fixed. Just don't know what's happening. They'll keep on doing postmortems until they get it right.
But also, just to zoom out a bit, Baj and Maya also come in on this, that indeed, if it does appear that we're heading to Trump 2.0, try and explain that, because here's someone who completely mishandled the pandemic, the economy is faltering, host of other problems that one could list will take forever, and yet he seems to be coming back.
Vasu, I think that's something we're all kind of grappling with across the world, where you see
the idea of the illiberal, authoritarian, populist politician making significant gains with the electorate. They're feeding on a sense of fear, a sense of grievance. I mentioned the hillbilly elegy just a little while ago, and I think that really kind of gives you an indication of how white America is poor. White America is feeling left out of the Democrat base, I mean, which is looking at immigrants and the welfare of minorities. And this whole idea that the minority is being appeased at the cost of the majority, we see parallels in the Indian electorate as well. So, you know, this is one of the most polarizing elections America has seen, and it's polarizing on the issue of race. It's polarizing on the issue of sort of, you know, the elite draining the swamp. He's coming back with that language. And most recently, I don't know if you paid attention to the last 2 days of the campaigning, as we saw attacks in France and then in Austria yesterday as well. This notion that Trump is telling, you know, white Americans that he's going to save them from terrorists. So you're kind of stirring the pot of fear and grievance and using that to make gains. And you're using every tactic in the book. You're using fake news, misinformation, disinformation, and just whipping up a frenzy.
Vasu, to take off on Maya's point.
Baj, could it also be... Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Baj. Yes.
There's an exit poll that shows 58% of white voters have voted for Trump. It also shows 36% of Hispanics have voted for Trump. Now, 58% is really high. It's much higher than people were expecting. People said that people over 65 were likely to vote for Biden because of Corona. Well, the poll shows 63% of them voted for Trump. 45 to 64, 55% voted for Trump. These two age groups make up 60% of the voting population. So, frankly, the white vote has gone to Trump. And there's this Cato study where 65% of Americans said, we have deplorable views. Now, you can take it from there what those deplorable views are.
Okay. All right. Let me go across. We also have Preeti Davra joining us. She's Managing Director, Asian Century Communications. She's also spokesperson for Howdy Modi. Everyone remembers that big event. Ravi Agarwal, Managing Editor of Foreign Policy, is also joining us. Preeti Davra, are we heading for Trump 2.0, and how would you explain it? Because as we're just saying, everyone's trying to wrap their heads around the fact that here's someone whose track record when it came to handling the pandemic was not great, economy faltering, and yet we're looking at the possibility of Trump 2.0. Is it also perhaps the fact that just like in 2016, the Democrat candidate that they put against him, you know, perhaps a little more likable than Hillary, but just not up to the match?
Good morning. Good morning to all your viewers. I just want to say I think people have to pay a little bit more attention to what Trump's economic record was before the pandemic. And I think that this vote that has come in surprisingly more for him than was expected is a result, I think, one of the trade deals, which, you know, he scrapped the trade deals that were beneficial to America. He has talked about the oil industry and how he will keep the energy jobs going. He has basically talked about the Islamic terrorism and come across as very strong on that, destroying ISIS. and also, of course, the conservative Christians in America. I think he appeals a lot to them. And people are complex, so I think they're not voting on a single issue. And on that framework, both economically, culturally, I think that Trump still appeals broadly to a large swath of this population that is seemed to be voting for him.
Okay. Ravi Agarwal, again, early days yet. It's still a close contest in many states. But if indeed it is heading for Trump 2.0, how would you see it? Would you see it in keeping with the fact that there is this rising curve of authoritarianism, and certainly America hasn't lost its appetite for it?
Look, I think it's way too early to go there. I think this race could still go absolutely anywhere. I know there are a lot of people who wanted to call it early, especially if Florida fell. But the reality is that where we stand right now is that it looks like maybe Florida might go Republican. The other two early states that we were looking at very closely, North Carolina and Georgia, are still very much up in the air. So I think it's too early to draw larger extrapolations from anything we've seen so far. But all of that said, what's clear is that this is a competitive race in much of America. And I think that's something that's easy to forget for those of us who live in cities like New York or Washington, D.C. And for a vast part of the American electorate, what they're looking at is how this matters to them in terms of either economics or in terms of, domestic policies that matter for them day to day. And they think less, I think, about issues such as foreign policy or, you mentioned a wider trend towards authoritarianism. I don't think they think about those things as much as us pundits and analysts tend to think about that.
Sure. Dorab, to the point about whether the Democrats once again couldn't come up with somebody who seemed to charge up their base and certainly charge up those who might be fence-sitters or undecideds, similar to 2016. Was Joe Biden perhaps not the best choice given the situation?
Vasu, we are aware of the fact that more Democratic voters were voting against Trump than for Biden. It is also a fact.
Just 1 second, just some breaking news. I don't know if you, I know that both Dorab and Baj are very interested in the Senate races. So the first Senate race that has been flipped and won by the Democrats is in Colorado. The Republican Senator Cory Gardner has lost and the Democrat has won there. That's the first one to flip. The polls did say this would lean towards a Democrat senator, and that has actually happened. So Dorab, your polls are right. When the polls are right, it's yours. When they're not, there's some sampling problem. Chalo. Carry on.
I don't know what I was talking about. Vasu, can you repeat the question? Sorry, I forgot. You broke my train of thought.
Prannoy has the habit of doing that.
Yeah, I've forgotten the question. I really haven't answered.
Vasu forgotten the question. He was saying, is Biden not the best candidate? Could have chosen a better candidate.
I was talking about Biden's winnability. Winnability. But anyway.
Yeah. But let me check. Sorry. Vasu, let me please complete that. On that, Hillary was more disliked than Trump. Biden is more liked than Trump. Of the people who disliked both Hillary and Trump, the vast majority broke for Trump last time. Biden has a much better positive score than has Trump. That is the point I was making. But again, if the polls are wrong, all this is wrong too. That's the issue. That is the issue.
This has gone back to
Prannoy, you want to go back to
a 1% lead,
numbers,
a 1% lead to Republicans. And with 70% of the votes counted, a 1% lead to Republicans. Or 75% of the votes counted. So a 1% lead, still vulnerable, but that'll be a big disappointment for the Democrats. So we'll take a short break and come back in just a moment and give you updates on and the implications of all of this and see who's really leading and which way is it heading. It's still early days, but we'll get an update and see whether trends are becoming clearer in just a moment from now. See you then.
Welcome back. Is Donald Trump going to confound pollsters and pundits once again like he did in 2016 and pull off a stunning second term? That's the big question that we, the world, is actually waiting to hear an answer to, as some of these polls, particularly in crucial states like Florida and Texas, extremely tight, but giving still Trump an edge. We have Sriram Lakshman with us. He's the US correspondent for The Hindu, joining us from Washington, D.C. Sriram, what are you seeing and hearing, and what are you picking up?
Thanks, Srinivasan. Well, you said this is the question the world is looking to for an answer for. And I think right now people are a lot more coy this year, making predictions about who's going to win the Electoral College this early in the evening. And the reason is we haven't got numbers. The major news organizations, many of whom got it wrong last time, haven't yet called the major states, the battleground states, the crucial states like North Carolina, Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, Texas, Michigan. They haven't yet called those states, and that's where the election is going to be won or lost. The states that have been called so far are states that we thought would anyway go to Biden or to Trump, or were likely to go to Biden and Trump. So my answer to your question is it's just too soon to say right now. And based on what happened in 2016, I don't see many people sticking their necks out and making a prediction on who's going to win the Electoral College vote. I certainly am not at this point in the evening.
Sure, but what do you think, before we open it up, we've got Baj, Dorab, Maya are all still with us. In the event that we're looking at a path to victory, a second path to victory for Trump, what do you think is working for him, given that, as we know, going in, the odds seem heavily stacked against him, with coronavirus cases and deaths in America surging again, with the economy still faltering, unrest on the streets? Clearly, that doesn't seem to have been strong enough factors to have made a second path to victory for him impossible.
Yes. So there are certainly paths open to victory for Trump. It's just that Biden has more paths, and his path to victory is broader. Trump would have to hold on to Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, North Carolina, Ohio, and he'd crucially need to win Pennsylvania as well. Srinivasan, last week on Saturday, Trump did 4 rallies in Pennsylvania on one day. He went back to Pennsylvania, I believe it was on Monday. The Biden camp finished up in Pennsylvania, and there's a reason for this. Both states are looking at Pennsylvania as crucial to their victory. So literally in terms of winning,
sure,
that would work for Trump. But also, we have to look at who turned out at the polls today. Democrats typically vote early, and Republicans typically vote on Election Day, which was today. It's still November 3rd here. And we need to look at whether white men, that's still a constituency that Trump's been holding on to. We have to look at how many seniors have defected
sure,
to, some of them have defected to Biden. We have to see how many still stick with Trump this year.
Okay, Dara, Baj, you want to come in on how it's now shaping up? Prannoy also back with us to look at how the numbers are shaping up, particularly in those crucial battleground states.
Let Baj go first, I'll come later.
I think all the southern battleground states, Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Trump is holding all of it. I would be very surprised now if Trump were to lose these, which means we are now really talking about the northern states between Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. There's 1 or 2 southern Sun Belt states that still have to come because they're more west. One is Arizona, that should be coming in soon, and the other is Nevada. Nevada is a Democrat state
Baj,
last
you're
time.
absolutely right. Let me just give you a quick update on those battleground swing states and just see what's happening there. And it's generally good news for Trump. Florida, let's look at that. More or less fully counted. It's Republicans are going to win that. It was a polling error, but it was it's been a complete turnaround and a huge victory for Trump there. Georgia, where we have about 50%. We'll just focus on Georgia for a second. Republicans are ahead there. Now moving on to Michigan. Again, this is a swing state which was meant to go to the Democrats. Republicans here are leading by 13% with about 30% of the votes counted. So that can change, but 13% lead. Look at Minnesota. Here the Democrats are leading. They're holding on to this swing state, which is very important for them. They were meant to win by 9%. They're at the moment leading with 30% of the votes counting. They're leading by about 30%. So Democrats are pretty solid in Minnesota. And let's look at another swing state, North Carolina. 80% of the votes have been counted, and it's just neck and neck. The lead that we're showing there for the Democrats is 0.15, and there's still 13% of the votes to be counted. So that's not a certainty at all. Pennsylvania, about 20-25% of the votes have been counted, and the Republicans are leading in Pennsylvania now. It's just gone ahead of that. It's changed, so it's just going back and forth, but it's a very narrow, plus or minus 1 and 2%. Wisconsin, about 19% has been counted. At the moment, the Democrats are leading, but it's again neck and neck. Earlier on, the Republicans were leading. In fact, I've got an update saying at 30% vote counted, the Republicans are ahead in Wisconsin by 3%. So basically, these are going back and forth. But look at that. The poll saying the Democrats should win this by 8%. And at the moment, it's very, very narrow. So all these, basically the bottom line is, as you go to these Democrat projected swing states, Republicans are doing much better than the polls projected and actually looking like winning many of them. So that's bad news. Now looking at the Republican projected swing states, that means where Republicans are projected to win by a very narrow margin, like this one, Ohio, Republicans projected to win by just 1%, and we have, I think, about 75% of the votes counted, and the Republicans are ahead by about 2% there. So they're holding on to their swing state. And now Texas. Let's have a look at Texas. Texas, so far, about 60% has been counted. If we move on to Texas, let's see. That's a huge state. Republicans were projected to win by 2%. At the moment, they are leading by 1.5 with 40% of the votes counted. So both their 60% of their votes counted. So 40% left, and the Republicans are ahead by 1.5. So both the swing states, Republican projected swing states, are currently narrowly being held, or Republicans are in the lead. Let's go back to Georgia, where the Democrats, this is actually a Democrat swing state. At the moment we have about 50% of the vote counted, but the lead that the Republicans have here is over 10%. So there's still a long way to go to count, but with a lead of 10%, it's going to be a lot for the Democrats to change. So the bottom line is that the Republicans are doing very well in the Democrat swing states, and they need them. They need at least 3/4 of them to win the election. At the moment, they're heading in that direction, but we're talking about only about 40 to 50% of the votes counted so far. So it's all variable. But it's currently, if you're a Democrat, you'd be worried. If you're a Republican, you'd be happy. Maya.
No, can I make a point, please?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Gaurav.
Prannoy,
yeah.
You know, the Democrats still haven't lost any state that carried in 2016. They're just not winning them, right? So the Democrats have another path to victory, which is get states like Colorado, which you already announced the senators out, the Republican senators out. Arizona, which they haven't had since God knows almost 25 years, where Maricopa County, which has 60% of the population, they were big leads. So they have another path to victory, so long as they hold on to all the Clinton states, and then they want part of the blue wall. Because, if currently Mr. Trump is holding on to everything that he had, the question is, so is Ms. Clinton. You have to ensure, Biden has to ensure that he picks up 2 or 3 of those Sun Belt states, a couple of them, and then goes up the north and picks up one of those 3 or 4 states. Minnesota was likely to be close, but doesn't seem to be close. So I think she has wider paths to victory than Mr. Trump, though he is on his path, absolutely on his path at the moment. But if he drops something in the West, then he has a problem.
Actually, on Dorab's point, if he holds
just one second. I'm just that if the Democrats hold all the states that they held in 2016, that would be a total of 217. 217. Yes. They would therefore need to get to 270 another 53. Yes. They need those 53 seats or electoral college votes out of the swing states. Now there are 139 Democrat swing states where they are most likely to win. So they must win 53 out of those 139. And at the moment, whatever results are coming in, they are leading in, I'll just tell you how many. They're leading in 15, which is North Carolina, 15 electoral college. They're leading in 10, Minnesota 25. They're leading in 25 and they need 53. And we've got no information yet on Arizona, Iowa, and Nevada.
You got Colorado.
So
why don't you add that? The senator is lost, you said, right? The senator is lost.
But Colorado was Democrat last time.
What? Was it already?
Yeah. Prannoy, we have...
Yes, it was Democrat.
Christine
they won that by a margin of 13.8%. Okay, Prannoy. Yeah.
We have Prannoy, if I may, we have Seema Sirohi joining us from New York. She's columnist for the Economic Times. But let's start with Christine Emba is also here with us, opinion columnist, the Washington Post from Washington DC. Thanks very much, both of you, for joining us. Christine, turning out to be a real cliffhanger. Not quite as many of the polls projected a comfortable lead for Biden. What is your take on what's going on? And if indeed it appears to be that Trump has the edge, how would you explain it?
Well, right now it's pretty early in the game, frankly, and it's actually also hard to explain. The difficulty with the race this year is that a mixture of results coming in at a variety of times. Certain states are reporting first their electoral totals that they have received from in-person voting today, while they're still counting the overwhelming number of mail-in ballots that came over the past several weeks. Other states are doing the process in reverse. They've counted most of their mail-in ballots and are still tabulating the results from active visits to the polls today. So unfortunately, while I think many of us had hoped that there would be a Biden landslide or at least a decisive lead early in the night, it looks like we may end up waiting through the night and to the next day or even longer as the results are tabulated from all corners before we can actually say something definitive about who's winning.
Okay. Seema Sirohi, what's your take? Again, I know a lot of caveats, it's still early days and all of that. But would you like to take a shot at explaining how Trump has managed, I mean, perhaps we're not talking of victory yet, but how he's managed to narrow what initially was a substantial lead between Biden and him up until June, July. The lead was much wider, and it's just come right down to the wire just as America went out to vote.
Yes, I think he's doing better than expected because all the polls, as you said, showed a comfortable lead for Joe Biden. But I think what changed was the frantic campaigning that he undertook, where thousands upon thousands of people showed up, with no care about the pandemic, etc. And there was a lot of enthusiasm on the ground. It was really palpable. And he was going to places where factories have closed down, where jobs have been lost. And he talked about the economy, and he talked about the fact that if you vote for Joe Biden, it's going to be socialism. So he was able to flip the narrative somewhat, and I think that's what you're seeing. Then there's this question of the shy Trump voter. I quite believe that to be the case because, it's just not acceptable today in American society, in polite American society, to say that you might vote for Trump. Because then they think you're like, quote unquote, deplorable. So lots and lots of people are not telling the pollsters. So the two polls that had 2016 right are the ones that are predicting that Trump might come back from behind and win again.
Right. Christine, could that have been one of the factors that, that Seema spoke about, that towards the end, Trump went on this, very, very aggressive campaign, even though he just recovered from the coronavirus? He was all over the place, particularly hitting battleground states, and Joe Biden was still being fairly cautious about getting out there. Could that be one of the factors?
I mean, that could definitely be a factor. We really did see Trump barnstorming across the United States over the past 10 to 15 days. That said, one of the questionable things about this sort of last spurt of campaigning was that many of the sites that he went to were actually sites that should have been considered safe for him in the past, which bespoke some level of fear. Again, I think that's a great point, though, about the shy Trump voter. You're right, Seema, that there is on some level a bit of disapproval from at least perhaps what Trump voters might call elites for admitting that you're a Trump voter. But I think that one of the enduring questions about the American electoral system and tracking it right now is how polls operate. Polls can only be so granular. You have to invest a lot of money to make them more targeted. One of the things that we've seen in states like Florida, Arizona, and Texas is actually that polls may have underestimated the amount of Latino support for Trump and his support among other minorities. Again, more careful targeting might have identified this, but if things, turn out unexpectedly, one of the big questions from this election will be, how did we miss these people again?
Well,
okay.
I think...
And Christine, absolutely very last quick question before we let you go and we have to go into a break is, in the event that we're looking at Trump 2.0, and I know there's still very early doors yet, what does that mean particularly for the very fraught nature of race equations in America right now?
I think it becomes even more fraught, unfortunately. I think that if Trump does win a second term, it will be seen rather justifiably as an assertion of truth, the fact that his narrative of racial strife, of disharmony, of two sides fighting against each other is actually one that's shared by perhaps a majority of the American population. That, in fact, that sense of fear and perhaps even some level of ethno-nationalism is a majority-held view in the United States. We might have thought that we had progressed past that, and if we haven't, that will be something alarming and fearful that we will have to reckon with over the next 4 years.
Okay. All right, that's a somber note to take a break on, but we'll take a break and come back with many more interesting twists and turns in this election. Take a break. Back in a minute.